Why Millionaires Rely on Reality, Not Optimism, by Wealthy Mindset Audiobooks. There's a kind of hope that feels like sunlight. It warms you, lifts you, makes the future seem close enough to touch. But while you're waiting for everything to work out, the people you thought were less optimistic are quietly pulling ahead. And the reason why isn't what you expect. There's a kind of hope that feels like sunlight. It warms you from the inside out. It lifts your chest when you wake up in the morning. It makes the future seem close enough to touch, almost tangible, like you could reach out and grab the life you've been dreaming about. You tell yourself that things are about to turn around, that this time will be different, that the investment you made, the business you started, the opportunity you've been nurturing, it's all going to pay off soon. And in those moments, hope doesn't just feel good. It feels essential. It feels like the very thing that separates you from the people who've already given up. But here's what nobody tells you about hope. It can become a place you live instead of a place you visit. You wake up each morning waiting for the day everything changes. You refresh your inbox obsessively, expecting the message that will shift your trajectory. You check your account balance with a kind of quiet anticipation, believing that if you just stay positive enough, if you keep your energy high, if you maintain the right mindset, the universe will eventually bend in your direction. Hope becomes your strategy. It becomes your plan. And you convince yourself that believing harder is the same as preparing better. Meanwhile, something curious happens. The people you thought were less optimistic than you, the ones who seemed almost cold in their calculations, who talked about risk before they talked about reward, who built safety nets you thought were unnecessary, those people quietly pull ahead, not overnight, not in some dramatic fashion, but steadily, relentlessly. And you can't quite understand it. They didn't seem to believe as much as you did. They didn't visualize as intensely. They didn't radiate the same kind of confidence. Yet somehow, they're moving forward while you're still waiting for your moment to arrive. You wonder what they know that you don't. And the answer, when you finally see it, isn't what you expect. It's not that they possess some secret knowledge about markets or money or opportunity. It's that they've learned something fundamental about the relationship between hope and reality. They've learned that hope, when it becomes a strategy, is a kind of blindness. It obscures the very things you need to see in order to build something lasting. It makes you focus on the best possible outcome while ignoring the dozen other outcomes that are far more likely. It turns preparation into pessimism and caution into cowardice. As Morgan Housel once observed, the ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want, is priceless. It is the highest dividend money pays. But reaching that freedom requires something more than hope. It requires seeing clearly. Most of the people who succeeded, who actually built wealth that lasted, who created lives of genuine financial freedom, weren't the ones who believed the hardest. They were the ones who prepared the best. They were the ones who asked not, "What if this works?" but "What if this doesn't?" They were the ones who ran scenarios in their heads, who tested their assumptions, who built their plans around probability instead of possibility. They didn't avoid risk. They didn't lack ambition. They simply refused to confuse enthusiasm with evidence. Because here's the truth that changes everything. Wealth isn't built on the foundation of best-case scenarios. It's built on the foundation of surviving worst-case scenarios. It's built by people who understand that the market doesn't care how much you believe. It doesn't care how many affirmations you've repeated or how clearly you visualized your success. It doesn't care about your positive energy or your unshakable faith. The market cares about one thing, and one thing only: whether you can stay in the game long enough to win. And staying in the game requires something fundamentally different from hope. It requires something harder. It requires looking at the world not as you wish it were, but as it actually is. It requires building margins for error. It requires preparing for delays, setbacks, and outcomes that fall short of your expectations. It requires the emotional discipline to protect yourself from your own optimism. This is the uncomfortable truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. We've been taught that optimism is a virtue, that belief is power, that mindset is everything. And there's truth in those ideas, partial truth. But we've taken them too far. We've started treating hope as if it were a substitute for planning. We've started confusing confidence with certainty. We've started believing that the people who prepare for difficulty are somehow less committed to success than the people who refuse to acknowledge it. But the millionaires, the ones who stay millionaires, who build wealth that compounds across decades, they know better. They've learned that reality, not optimism, is the foundation of everything that lasts. We're told from a young age that optimism is a virtue, that positive thinking is a superpower, that if you can dream it, you can achieve it. And there's partial truth in that, real truth, actually. Optimism can be the spark that gets you started. It can be the fuel that keeps you going when the road gets steep and the destination feels impossibly far away. It can be the difference between taking the first step and staying frozen in place. But somewhere along the way, something shifted in our collective understanding. We stopped treating optimism as fuel and started treating it as the entire vehicle. We started believing that mindset alone could replace strategy, that belief could replace preparation, that hope could replace math. We turned optimism into a religion, and in doing so, we made it dangerous. Because when you build your financial life on the assumption that things will work out, that the market will rise, that the opportunity will materialize, that the timing will be perfect, you're not actually building, you're hoping. And hope by itself is not a foundation. It's a wish wearing the clothes of a plan. Napoleon Hill once wrote, "A goal is a dream with a deadline." But what he didn't say, what gets lost in translation, is that a deadline without preparation is just pressure. A dream without a plan is just a fantasy. The millionaire mindset, the real one that exists beyond the motivational posters and the seminar stages, sounds less like a motivational speech and more like an engineer running simulations. It sounds like someone testing for failure points. It sounds like someone asking uncomfortable questions that most people would rather avoid. What happens if this takes twice as long as I think? What happens if the market turns against me? What happens if my assumptions are wrong? What happens if the thing I'm counting on doesn't happen at all? These aren't the questions of a pessimist. They're not the questions of someone who lacks faith or vision. They're the questions of someone who understands that wealth is built in the long stretches of uncertainty, and the only way to survive uncertainty is to plan for it, to respect it, to build your life in a way that doesn't require everything to go perfectly. Let me tell you about two people. Their names don't matter, so let's call them Maya and David. Both wanted the same thing: financial freedom, the ability to live life on their own terms, the security that comes from building something real. Both worked hard, both believed in themselves, but they approached the journey differently, and that difference changed everything. Maya was a true believer. She read the books, attended the seminars, surrounded herself with positive people who reinforced her vision. When she found an opportunity that excited her, a business venture that felt aligned with her passion, She went all in. She didn't just invest money, she invested her identity. She believed in it so deeply that preparing for failure felt like betrayal. Building a plan B, she told herself, was for people who didn't believe enough. It was for people who were hedging their bets, playing small, letting fear dictate their choices. So, she didn't build one. She poured everything she had into that single vision and waited for it to unfold. David wanted the same outcome, but he approached it differently. Not because he was more talented or more intelligent, but because he'd learned something from watching others rise and fall. He didn't avoid risk, but he measured it. He didn't avoid opportunity, but he tested it. When he committed resources to something, he did it with a portion of what he had, not all of it. He built reserves. He diversified. He assumed that some things would fail, not because he lacked confidence, but because failure is a natural part of any system that involves uncertainty. And he structured his life so that failure in one area wouldn't collapse everything else. 3 years passed. Maya's opportunity didn't work out the way she'd hoped. It wasn't a disaster, but it took longer than expected, cost more than anticipated, and returned less than she'd imagined. And because she'd put everything into it, her savings, her time, her emotional energy, she had nothing left to pivot with. She had to start over, not from zero, but from a place of exhaustion and doubt. She was still hopeful, yes, but she was also tired, worn down, wondering if all that belief had been misplaced. David's journey wasn't perfect either. Some of his bets failed. Some of his investments underperformed. But because he'd built margins, because he'd prepared for disappointment, the failures didn't destroy him. They informed him. He adjusted. He learned. He kept moving. And at the end of those 3 years, while Maya was still hopeful but exhausted, David was still realistic but stable. And here's the thing about stability. It's what allows you to keep playing. It's what lets you take the next swing. It's what turns years into decades and decades into legacy. Hope alone doesn't create stability. Realism does. Preparation does. The willingness to look at the downside and build accordingly, that's what creates the foundation for everything else. Realism doesn't feel as good as hope. It doesn't give you the rush. It doesn't light you up the way a big, beautiful vision does. Realism asks you to do something uncomfortable. It asks you to look at the downside, to imagine failure, to run the numbers even when the numbers don't support the story you're telling yourself. It asks you to sit with the possibility that things might take longer, cost more, and return less than you expect. And nobody wants to do that. We want to believe that our case is different, that our timing is perfect, that our instincts are sharper than the last person's, that we've somehow found the opportunity everyone else missed, the angle no one else saw. This isn't arrogance. It's human nature. We're wired to see patterns that favor us, to overestimate our abilities, to underestimate how long things will take. Psychologists call it optimism bias, and it's one of the most universal cognitive distortions we carry. It's why we think we'll finish the project ahead of schedule, why we believe our investment will outperform the market, why we assume our business will be the exception to the rule. We need to believe we're special because believing otherwise feels like admitting defeat before we've even started. But here's what separates those who build lasting wealth from those who chase it. Millionaires don't rely on being special. They rely on being prepared. They assume the market is smarter than anyone, smarter than them, smarter than their advisors, smarter than the experts on television predicting the next big thing. They build their lives around a simple truth that sounds contradictory at first, but becomes liberating once you understand it. You can be optimistic about the future and realistic about the path to get there. This is the paradox. This is the uncomfortable reconciliation that most people never make. You can believe in your potential and still prepare for setbacks. You can pursue your dreams with everything you have and still build a safety net. You can be ambitious and cautious at the same time. These aren't opposing forces. They're complementary strategies. They're two sides of the same coin. And the most successful people, the ones who build wealth that lasts, who create lives of genuine freedom, don't choose between them. They hold both at once. They dream big, but they bet small. They aim high, but they protect the downside. They believe in themselves deeply, but they don't confuse belief with certainty. They know that confidence is important, but overconfidence is lethal. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca once observed, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But preparation requires acknowledging that luck might not show up at all. This shift from hope-based optimism to probability-based realism changes everything. It changes how you invest because you stop looking for the one stock that will make you rich and start building a portfolio that can survive volatility. It changes how you build a business because you stop betting everything on a single launch and start testing, iterating, learning from small failures before they become catastrophic ones. It changes how you navigate relationships and careers and risk itself because you stop needing certainty and start embracing the reality that uncertainty is the only constant. Think about what happens when you make this shift internally. When you stop needing everything to go perfectly, you stop being fragile. You stop being devastated by setbacks because you've already imagined them, already prepared for them, already built margins that allow you to absorb the blow. You stop being paralyzed by fear because fear loses its power when you've already answered the question it's asking, what if this doesn't work? You've already thought it through. You've already built contingencies. You've already accepted that failure is possible and planned accordingly. Instead of fragility, you develop something far more valuable. You become someone who can absorb shocks, someone who can pivot when circumstances change, someone who can outlast the chaos that breaks everyone else. Because while others are scrambling, panicking, or giving up entirely, you're still standing. You're still liquid. You're still in the game. And in the long run, that's what matters most. This isn't about being pessimistic. It's not about expecting failure or living in fear. It's about being honest. It's about looking at the world as it is, not as you wish it were. It's about building your life on a foundation that doesn't require everything to align perfectly. Because the truth is, things rarely align perfectly. Markets fluctuate. Opportunities take longer than expected. Plans change. People disappoint you. The universe doesn't bend to your timeline. But when you've built your life with that reality in mind, when you've created space for things to go wrong without destroying you, you gain something extraordinary. You gain freedom. Not the freedom that comes from having everything go your way, but the freedom that comes from knowing you'll be okay even when it doesn't. The freedom that comes from resilience instead of luck. The freedom that comes from being prepared instead of being hopeful. And here's the beautiful irony. When you stop depending on hope to carry you, when you build systems and structures that don't require perfect outcomes, you actually start achieving more. Not because you're luckier, not because the universe suddenly favors you, but because you're still there when others have fallen away. Because you're still learning when others have quit. Because you're still playing the game when everyone else has gone home. Here's the paradox that changes everything. When you stop depending on hope to carry you, you actually start achieving more. Not because you suddenly become luckier, not because the universe begins to favor you, but because you're still standing when others have fallen. You're still liquid when others are locked in, unable to move, trapped by decisions they made when they were certain things would work out. You're still learning when others have given up, convinced that the game was rigged against them from the start. The difference isn't in what happens to you. The difference is in what you're able to do when things don't go according to plan. Wealth, it turns out, isn't about picking the perfect moment or identifying the perfect opportunity. It's not about being smarter than everyone else or having some special insight that others lack. Wealth is about surviving enough imperfect moments that eventually one of them works. It's about staying in the game long enough that probability starts working in your favor. It's about understanding that success isn't a single event. It's a long series of recoveries, adjustments, and second chances that only become possible if you're still around to take them. Think about how most people approach investing, business, or any major financial decision. They start with the dream. They imagine the best possible outcome, the stock that triples, the business that takes off, the real estate that appreciates beyond expectations. And that vision becomes so intoxicating, so compelling, that it crowds out everything else. They don't ask the harder questions because asking those questions feels like inviting negativity. It feels like betraying the vision. It feels like they're sabotaging their own success before they even start. But when someone with a millionaire mindset looks at an investment, they don't start with the potential upside. They start with the potential downside. Not because they're afraid, not because they lack confidence or ambition, but because they're thorough, because they understand that the upside takes care of itself if you survive long enough to see it, but the downside can end the game entirely if you're not prepared for it. So they ask different questions. Uncomfortable questions. Questions that most people avoid because the answers might be inconvenient. If this investment loses half its value, am I okay? Can I sleep at night? Can I still pay my bills, fund my life, maintain my obligations? If this takes 5 years instead of 2, can I wait? Do I have the resources, the patience, the emotional stamina to hold on when nothing seems to be working? And the big one, if this fails entirely, does it take me down with it? Does this single decision have the power to destroy everything else I've built? These questions aren't pessimistic. They're not the product of negative thinking or limiting beliefs. They're protective. They're the firewall between calculated bets and emotional gambles. They're what allows you to take risk without being reckless, to be bold without being foolish. Because once you've answered these questions honestly, once you know that you can survive the downside, you've created something invaluable. You've created permission to take the risk in the first place. James Clear writes, "You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems." And the system that matters most isn't the one that maximizes your upside. It's the one that protects your downside, your tshirkut. Because only once the downside is protected, only once you've built the margins, the reserves, the contingencies that allow you to absorb failure, can you allow yourself to dream. Only then can you permit yourself to imagine the upside, to visualize the best possible outcome, to get excited about what might happen. But here's the critical distinction. The upside is never the foundation. It's the bonus. It's the reward for having built something that can survive disappointment. It's what you get to enjoy because you didn't need it to survive. The hopeful investor needs the stock to go up. Their plan depends on it. Their timeline requires it. Their financial security is built on the assumption that it will happen. So when it doesn't, when the market turns, when the opportunity takes longer, when reality fails to match expectation, they're devastated. They're stuck. They're at the mercy of outcomes they can't control. The realistic investor is fine if the stock doesn't go up, at least for a while. They'd prefer it to rise, obviously. They're hoping it will, but their life doesn't depend on it. Their security isn't contingent on it. They've structured their finances, their expectations, their emotional state in a way that allows them to wait, to be patient, to let time do its work without panic, without desperation, without the crushing need for immediate results. One person is at the mercy of outcomes. The other is positioned for outcomes. One needs luck. The other has created space for luck to eventually arrive. And over time, over the long years that separate those who build wealth from those who chase it, that difference compounds into something profound. It compounds into staying power, into resilience, into the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've built something that doesn't need everything to go right in order to survive. This is what the millionaire mindset actually looks like. Not flashy, not dramatic, not particularly inspiring in the moment, but powerful, sustainable, real. Let me tell you a story about two farmers in a drought. It's a simple story, but it contains everything you need to understand about the difference between hope and preparation, between wishing for outcomes and building for them. The first farmer wakes up every morning and looks at the sky. Today will be the day it rains, he tells himself. He feels it in his bones. He believes it with every fiber of his being. And because he believes it so deeply, he plants his entire field in anticipation. He sows every seed he has, covers every inch of available land, because what kind of farmer doesn't believe in rain? What kind of person plans for failure? To him, preparing for the possibility that the rain won't come feels like doubt. It feels like he's inviting disaster by acknowledging it. So he doesn't. He plants everything and waits for the sky to cooperate. The second farmer also hopes for rain. He wants it just as much as the first farmer does. He looks at the same sky, feels the same dry wind, carries the same worry in his chest. But he doesn't count on it. He doesn't build his survival around the assumption that nature will bend to his timeline. Instead, he digs a well. He builds irrigation channels. He plants a smaller field, one he can actually water if the rain doesn't come. It's more work. It's less glamorous. It doesn't feel as optimistic or as bold. But he refuses to let his survival depend on something he can't control. Months pass. The rain doesn't come. The sky stays clear, indifferent, unmoved by belief or prayer or positive thinking. And the first farmer watches his field die. The crops wither. The soil cracks. And his optimism, for all its intensity, couldn't water a single plant. His belief couldn't save anything. He's devastated, not just financially, though that's real enough. He's devastated emotionally, spiritually even, because he'd tied his entire identity to that hope. He'd told himself that believing was enough, that faith would be rewarded, that the universe responds to conviction. The second farmer's field survives. Not all of it, perhaps. Not as abundantly as it would have if the rain had come, but it survives. It produces. It keeps him going. And here's the crucial part. He survives not because he was lucky, but because he was ready. He didn't need the rain to come on his timeline. He didn't need the universe to bend to his vision. He'd built something that could withstand reality as it was, not as he wished it to be. When the rain finally does come, and it always does, eventually, the second farmer is still there to benefit from it. His well is still functioning. His irrigation still works. And now, with rain added to his existing systems, he thrives. The first farmer, meanwhile, has already given up. He's already walked away, convinced that the land was cursed, that he was unlucky, that forces beyond his control conspired against him. He's not wrong about the forces beyond his control. He's just wrong about what that means, about how you're supposed to respond to that reality. This is the lesson that separates those who build wealth from those who chase it. Hope doesn't carry you through droughts. Systems do. Preparation does. Realism does. Morgan Housel put it perfectly when he wrote, "The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want, is priceless." But reaching that freedom doesn't come from hoping things work out. It comes from building systems that work even when things don't. Look at the entrepreneurs who actually made it. Not the ones in the headlines who got lucky once and became overnight sensations, but the ones who built empires that lasted, who created wealth that compounded across decades. Almost all of them failed multiple times before they succeeded. The difference is they survived those failures. They absorbed the losses, learned from them, and kept going. And they could only do that because they'd built systems that allowed them to fail without being destroyed. They didn't bet everything on a single launch. They tested smaller versions first. They didn't invest money they couldn't afford to lose. They built reserves that could sustain them through setbacks. They didn't tie their self-worth to outcomes they couldn't control. They separated their identity from individual results and focused instead on the process, the system, the long-term trajectory. This is what resilience actually looks like. It's not about being tougher or braver or more optimistic than everyone else. It's about being smarter in how you structure your decisions. It's about understanding that failure is part of the equation, not an exception to it. It's about building your life in a way that acknowledges uncertainty instead of pretending it doesn't exist. When you do this, when you shift from hoping for the best to preparing for the real, you gain something that no amount of positive thinking can provide. You gain staying power. You gain the ability to outlast the inevitable droughts that come for everyone. You gain the freedom to take risks because you've protected yourself from ruin. And most importantly, you're still there when the rain finally comes, still in position to benefit from it, still in the game, while others have already walked away. The field doesn't care how much you believe. The market doesn't care how optimistic you are. Reality operates on its own terms. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can build something real. The difference between a calculated risk and a reckless gamble isn't the size of the bet. It's not about how much money you're putting in or how ambitious the opportunity appears. The difference is simpler, starker, and more important than that. It's whether you can survive losing it. That's the line. That's the boundary that separates those who build wealth from those who blow up spectacularly. Can you take this risk and, if it goes completely wrong, still be standing on the other side? Can you absorb the loss without losing everything else you've built? If the answer is no, then it doesn't matter how good the opportunity looks. It's not a calculated risk. It's a gamble with your future. Real millionaires aren't afraid of risk. Let's be clear about that. They take risks constantly on investments, on business ventures, on people and ideas that haven't been proven yet. But they're afraid of stupid risk. They're terrified of the kind that comes from confusing enthusiasm with analysis, from betting everything on a single outcome simply because they believe it will work. They understand something fundamental that gets lost in all the motivational rhetoric. Even the best outcomes are never guaranteed. Even the most promising opportunities can fail. Even the smartest predictions can be wrong. So they don't put themselves in positions where they need to be right. They don't structure their lives around the assumption that this one thing will work out. Instead, they build portfolios, not positions. They build streams, not rivers. They build systems, not wishes. And slowly, quietly, without fanfare or headlines, they build wealth. Not because every bet pays off, but because enough of them do, and the ones that don't can't destroy them. Now, I know what you might be feeling right now, because giving up hope-based optimism feels like loss. It feels like you're surrendering something precious, something that made you different, something that kept you dreaming when everyone else settled. It feels like you're becoming cynical, jaded, like you're joining the ranks of people who've given up on magic. And that feeling is real. It's uncomfortable. It's why most people never make this shift. They'd rather keep hoping, keep believing, keep waiting for the universe to deliver, because the alternative feels like defeat. But here's what's actually happening when you make this transition. You're not giving up hope. You're trading one kind of hope for another. You're trading the hope that everything will work out for the knowledge that you'll be okay even if it doesn't. And that's not a downgrade. That's an upgrade. That's moving from fragile optimism to anti-fragile realism. You're trading the need for certainty, the desperate need for things to go according to plan, for the power of adaptability. You're trading the fragility of wishful thinking, which shatters the moment reality diverges from expectation, for the strength of realistic planning, which bends but doesn't break. As Naval Ravikant observed, desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. When you stop needing specific outcomes, you stop being unhappy in their absence. And here's what's beautiful about this trade, what makes it not just practical, but liberating. It actually makes you more capable of pursuing big things, not less, more. Because when you're not afraid of failure, when you've built a life that can absorb it, when you've created margins that allow you to take a hit without being destroyed, you become free to take risks that the hopeful person can't. Think about that for a moment. The person who needs everything to work out can't afford to experiment. They can't afford to try the unlikely thing, to test the unconventional idea, to pivot when circumstances change. They're locked in. They're committed. They've bet everything on one path, and now they have to see it through, regardless of what they learn along the way. Their hope has become a prison. But the person who's prepared for failure, they're free. They can try things. They can explore. They can take intelligent risks on opportunities with asymmetric upside, opportunities that might not work, but won't destroy them if they don't. They can afford to be wrong 9 times because they've built a life that only needs them to be right once. And that freedom, that ability to keep playing, keep learning, keep adjusting, is what creates real wealth over time. This is the counterintuitive truth that changes everything. Protection creates possibility. Preparing for the downside doesn't limit your upside. It enables it. When you've built safety nets, when you've diversified your bets, when you've created systems that don't require perfection, you gain the freedom to reach for things that others can't touch. You gain permission to fail, which is another way of saying you gain permission to truly try. The hopeful person says, I believe this will work, so I'm going all in. The realistic person says, I believe this might work, so I'm going to test it in a way that protects me if it doesn't. One sounds more committed, one sounds more passionate. But over time, over the long decades that separate those who build wealth from those who chase it, the second approach wins. Not because it's more inspiring, but because it's sustainable, because it allows you to keep playing long after everyone else has been forced to quit. The hopeful person needs every bet to win. They've structured their life in a way that requires each decision to pay off, each investment to appreciate, each opportunity to materialize exactly as imagined. They're playing a game where they can't afford to be wrong, which means they're living with constant, low-level anxiety even when things are going well. The realistic person, meanwhile, can afford to lose 9 times if the 10th time pays off. They've built enough margin, enough diversification, enough reserves that failure in one area doesn't cascade into catastrophe everywhere else. So ask yourself this: who do you think sleeps better at night? Who keeps going when things get hard? Who's still in the game 10 years from now, 20 years from now, still learning, still adapting, still building? The answer is obvious once you see it clearly. But here's what's not obvious: what takes real wisdom to understand. Millionaires don't rely on reality instead of optimism. That's not the trade they're making. They rely on reality as optimism. They see the world clearly, the risks, the variables, the uncertainties, and they find hope not in denying those things exist, but in preparing for them. They don't close their eyes and wish for the best. They open their eyes, see what's actually there, and build accordingly. This is a fundamentally different kind of confidence. They don't find it in believing everything will work out. They find it in knowing they'll be okay even if it doesn't. And that knowing, that deep structural confidence that comes from preparation rather than hope, changes everything about how you move through the world. It changes what risks you can take. It changes how you respond to setbacks. It changes whether you can sleep at night or whether you lie awake running disaster scenarios through your mind. This shift from needing the world to cooperate to being ready for it not to is what separates those who build wealth from those who chase it. It's the difference between someone who's dependent on outcomes and someone who's positioned for them. One person wakes up each day hoping today is the day their bet pays off. The other wakes up knowing that whether it pays off today or not, they'll be fine. They've built a life that doesn't require perfect timing or flawless execution. They've created space for things to take longer, cost more, and deliver less than expected. Wealth is built by people who understand that the future is uncertain, and that uncertainty is exactly why you need margins, reserves, and backup plans. It's not built by the people who are most confident about what's coming. It's built by the people who are most prepared for the possibility that what's coming might be different from what they expect. They don't try to predict the future with precision. They try to build something that can survive multiple different futures. Napoleon Hill wrote, "Before success comes in any man's life, he is sure to meet with much temporary defeat and perhaps some failure." But the key word there is temporary. Defeat only stays temporary if you're still standing afterward, if you haven't been wiped out, if you can absorb the blow and keep moving. And that requires something more than belief. It requires structure. So these people, the ones who actually build lasting wealth, look at probability instead of possibility. They think in terms of likely instead of maybe. They ask, what's the downside, before they ask, what's the upside? This doesn't make them pessimists. It makes them realists. It makes them people who can see opportunity clearly because they're not blinded by their own hope. They can evaluate an investment without needing it to be good. They can walk away from something that looks promising but doesn't meet their criteria for downside protection. They have the discipline to say no to things that might work because they're focused on things that probably will work, or at least things that won't destroy them if they don't. Over time, and this is the part that matters most, the part that compounds, those people accumulate something the purely hopeful never do. They accumulate staying power. They accumulate resilience. They accumulate the kind of stability that allows them to weather storms that would destroy others. They can absorb losses without being emotionally devastated. They can wait out downturns without panicking. They can keep playing the long game while everyone else is forced to cash out, give up, or start over from zero. And here's the beautiful irony. Because they can survive the bad times, they're always there for the good times. They're positioned to benefit when opportunities arise because they haven't been eliminated from the game. They're still liquid when others are locked in. They're still learning when others have quit. They're still building when others are rebuilding from rubble. This is what real wealth looks like. Not flashy, not dramatic, not particularly inspiring if you're looking for motivation in the moment, but powerful, sustainable, compounding. The kind of wealth that lasts because it was built on foundations that don't require luck, that don't need everything to go perfectly, that can bend without breaking. The question isn't whether you are optimistic or pessimistic. The question is whether your optimism is grounded in reality or floating in wishful thinking. Whether your confidence comes from hoping you're right or knowing you'll be okay if you're wrong. Whether you're building something that needs perfect conditions or something that can thrive in imperfect ones. That's the shift. That's what changes everything. And once you make it, you can't go back to the old way of thinking because you've tasted something better than hope. You've tasted certainty, not the certainty that things will work out, but the certainty that you will. If you've been waiting for things to work out, if you've been holding on to the belief that your optimism alone will carry you through, that your positive mindset will somehow translate directly into positive outcomes, I want you to consider something uncomfortable. What if the very thing you think is keeping you going is actually holding you back? What if the hope that feels so necessary, so vital to your survival, is actually preventing you from doing the hard, unglamorous work of preparing for reality? This isn't an easy question to sit with, because hope feels good. It feels noble. It feels like the thing that separates dreamers from quitters, believers from cynics. It feels like the fuel that keeps you moving when everything else tells you to stop. And in some ways, that's true. Hope can get you started. It can get you through the first few obstacles. But at some point, at the point where you need to build something sustainable, hope alone becomes a liability. It becomes the excuse you use to avoid the harder work of realistic planning. What if the millionaire mindset isn't about believing harder, but about seeing clearer? What if it's not about having more faith or more confidence or more positive energy, but about having more clarity, about looking at the world as it actually is instead of as you wish it were, about making decisions based on probability instead of possibility, on evidence instead of emotion, on what's likely instead of what's merely imaginable? This shift from believing harder to seeing clearer doesn't mean giving up on your dreams. It doesn't mean settling for less. It doesn't mean becoming someone who doesn't believe in anything. Let's be absolutely clear about that, because this is where people get confused, where they mistake realism for resignation. You can still dream big. You can still pursue ambitious goals. You can still want more from life than what you currently have. The difference is in how you pursue those things. It means becoming someone who believes in themselves enough to prepare for the worst. Think about what that actually means. It's not a lack of confidence. It's a deeper form of confidence. It's saying, I believe in my ability to handle whatever comes, even if what comes isn't what I hoped for. It's respecting uncertainty enough to plan for it, to build margins around it, to create space for reality, to diverge from expectation without destroying you in the process. It means understanding that the path to wealth isn't paved with wishful thinking. It's paved with realistic action, with decisions that account for downside risk, with systems that work even when conditions aren't perfect, with the discipline to do today what will protect you tomorrow, even when that discipline feels unnecessary, even when hope is whispering that everything will work out on its own. James Clear writes, "You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And your system, the foundation upon which everything else is built, cannot be made of hope. It has to be made of something sturdier. It has to be made of realistic assessment, of honest evaluation, of preparation that doesn't require the universe to cooperate. Hope feels good. It does. I'm not dismissing that. I'm not saying you should become someone who doesn't feel hope or doesn't allow yourself moments of optimism about the future. But reality builds wealth. Reality, clear-eyed, unflinching, honest assessment of what's actually happening and what's actually required is what allows you to make decisions that compound over time. Reality is what allows you to protect yourself from your own enthusiasm. Reality is what keeps you in the game when everyone else's hope has run out. The sooner you learn to see the difference between hoping for an outcome and preparing for multiple possible outcomes, the sooner you stop waiting for magic and start building something real. You stop checking your inbox every hour, waiting for the opportunity that will change everything. You stop refreshing your account balance, hoping today is the day it all pays off. You stop living in a state of perpetual anticipation, always waiting for the moment when your belief finally gets rewarded. Instead, you start building. You build systems that don't require perfect timing. You build reserves that don't require perfect conditions. You build a life that can absorb disappointment without collapsing. And in doing so, you create something that hope alone could never create. You create staying power. You create the ability to outlast uncertainty. You create the foundation for wealth that actually lasts. This is the moment where everything changes. Not when you start believing harder, but when you start seeing clearer. Not when you commit more fully to hope, but when you commit more fully to reality. Not when you convince yourself that everything will work out, but when you build a life that works out regardless of what happens. The millionaire mindset was never about optimism. It was about this, about the courage to see things as they are, and the wisdom to build accordingly. And once you understand that, once you really internalize it, you can't go back to waiting. You can only move forward, with your eyes open, building something real. There was a time when hope felt like the only thing you had. It was the only currency that mattered, the only asset you could claim with certainty. It was the thing that separated dreamers from quitters, believers from those who'd given up. You held on to it fiercely, protectively, because letting go felt like admitting defeat. Hope was your identity. It was what made you different. It was what convinced you that your story would end differently than the cautionary tales you'd heard. And for a while, that hope carried you. It got you out of bed. It kept you moving when logic suggested you should stop. But now you see it differently. Not as something to abandon entirely, but as something to hold more lightly, more wisely. You've learned to carry hope alongside something sturdier, something that doesn't evaporate the moment reality diverges from expectation. You still have dreams. You still want things. You still believe in possibilities that others might dismiss. But you're no longer dependent on those dreams materializing exactly as imagined. You're no longer fragile in the face of delay or disappointment. You realize now that protecting yourself from the worst doesn't diminish your capacity for the best. It expands it, because you're no longer operating from a place of desperation, from a place of needing this one thing to work out or else. You're operating from a place of possibility, where multiple futures exist, and you're prepared for more than one of them. This changes everything about how you feel, about your decisions, about your future, about yourself. When you build margins into your life, financial margins, emotional margins, time margins, you're not being fearful. You're being kind to your future self. You're being kind to the version of you who will exist 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, when circumstances have inevitably shifted in ways you can't predict today. You're giving that future self options. You're giving them breathing room. You're giving them the gift of not having to be perfect, not having to be right about everything, not having to execute flawlessly in order to be okay. There's a quiet peace in knowing that you don't need everything to go right, that your well-being, your security, your sense of self doesn't hinge on perfect timing or flawless execution. You can make a mistake and survive it. You can be wrong about something and adjust. You can face disappointment without being destroyed by it. This knowing, this deep structural knowing, changes how you sleep at night. It changes how you breathe during the day. It changes the quality of your presence because you're not constantly calculating, constantly worrying, constantly scanning the horizon for threats to your fragile plan. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. When you stop needing specific outcomes, you stop being poor in spirit even when you're building material wealth. This isn't resignation. Let's be clear about that. This isn't settling or giving up or lowering your standards. This is liberation. This is the freedom that comes from building a foundation that can hold you even when the world doesn't cooperate, even when markets shift, even when opportunities take longer than expected, even when other people let you down, even when you let yourself down. You've built something that doesn't require perfection, and in building that, you've freed yourself from the tyranny of needing everything to align just right. And in that freedom, in that space created by realistic preparation, you discover something unexpected, something that seems almost paradoxical until you experience it yourself. You can dream bigger, precisely because you've prepared for smaller outcomes. You can reach for more ambitious goals because you're not destroyed if you fall short. You can take more meaningful risks because you've protected yourself from catastrophic failure. The person who needs everything to work out can't afford to dream too big. The stakes are too high. The fall would be too far. But you who've built margins, who've prepared for disappointment, who've created systems that work across multiple scenarios, you're free to reach for things that others can't touch. You're free to try. You're free to fail. You're free to learn and adjust and try again. And that freedom is worth more than any amount of blind optimism could ever provide. This is what it feels like to shift from hope-based living to reality-based building. Not emptier, fuller. Not smaller, bigger. Not more afraid, more free. The journey from hope to realism isn't a straight line. It's not something you figure out once and then master forever. It's a spiral, returning again and again to the same lessons with deeper understanding each time. You think you've learned to prepare for uncertainty, and then life presents a new form of uncertainty you hadn't considered. You think you've built enough margin, and then you discover another area where you're more vulnerable than you realized. But each time you return to these lessons, you understand them more deeply. You integrate them more fully. You become not just someone who knows these things intellectually, but someone who embodies them. You learn to hold your ambitions with open hands, not loosely, as if they don't matter, but openly, as if they matter deeply without defining you completely. You love your goals, you work toward them with discipline and commitment, but you don't need them to validate your worth. You don't need to achieve them to prove you're valuable, intelligent, or deserving. You move toward the future with intention, with energy, with focus, but without demanding it arrive on schedule, without insisting that your timeline is the universe's timeline. There's humility in this, a deep, quiet humility that comes from acknowledging that you're not the architect of all outcomes. You're not the one who controls markets or timing, or other people's decisions. You're only the steward of your own preparation. You can control your effort, your systems, your choices. You can control how you structure your finances, how you respond to setbacks, how you treat the gap between expectation and reality. But you can't control whether the investment pays off this year or next. You can't control whether the opportunity materializes. You can't control whether other people see your value or whether circumstances align in your favor. And somehow, and this is the beautiful paradox, in accepting what you cannot control, you gain mastery over what you can. Your choices become clearer because they're not clouded by the need for specific outcomes. Your systems become stronger because they're built to work across multiple scenarios, not just the best case one. Your resilience deepens because it's no longer dependent on things going your way. You've built something that bends without breaking, that absorbs without shattering, that continues regardless of what the world throws at you. The world still surprises you. It still delivers unexpected gifts and unexpected disappointments. It still takes longer than you'd like, costs more than you planned, and unfolds differently than you imagined. But it no longer defines you. It no longer has the power to make you question your worth or your path or your capacity, because you've built an inner stability that doesn't require external perfection. You've created a core of self that remains steady even when circumstances shift. Morgan Housel captures this beautifully when he writes, "The highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, 'I can do whatever I want today.'" But that ability doesn't come from controlling outcomes. It comes from building a life that can handle multiple outcomes. You sleep better now, not because everything is certain, nothing is certain. Not because you figured it all out, you haven't. Not because your path is clear or your future is guaranteed, it isn't. You sleep better because you know you'll be okay either way. You know that if this investment fails, you have others. If this opportunity doesn't work out, you'll find another. If this timeline doesn't hold, you have the resources to wait. You've built a life that doesn't hinge on any single thing going right. This is the gift of realism. Not the absence of hope, but hope tempered by wisdom. Not the death of ambition, but aspiration grounded in preparation. Not the abandonment of dreams, but dreams supported by structure. You still want things. You still reach for them. You still believe in possibilities that others might dismiss as unlikely. But you're no longer dependent on those possibilities materializing in order to be okay. You're no longer fragile in the face of delay or change. You've learned that the opposite of hope isn't despair. It's preparedness. It's the calm that comes from knowing you've done what you can do, built what you can build, prepared for what you can prepare for. And whatever comes next, whether it's what you hoped for or something different entirely, you'll handle it. Not because you're stronger than everyone else or smarter than everyone else, but because you've built a life designed to handle reality, whatever form it takes. And in that knowing, in that deep structural confidence, you find something that blind optimism could never provide. You find peace. You find the ability to be present today instead of constantly anxious about tomorrow. You find the freedom to enjoy the journey instead of white-knuckling your way toward a destination you're terrified might not arrive. This is what it means to hold both hope and realism, both dreams and preparation, both ambition and humility. And it's in this balance, this wise, mature balance, that real wealth is built. Not just financial wealth, though that often follows, but the wealth of a life well lived, well prepared, and deeply at peace. The millionaire mindset was never about having more faith or less fear. It was never about believing harder or visualizing more intensely. or maintaining a more positive attitude than everyone else. It was about understanding something fundamental, something that changes everything once you truly see it. Wealth is built in the gap between what you hope for and what you prepare for. In that gap, in that space between your best case scenario and your realistic assessment, lives every sustainable fortune, every lasting legacy, every life that thrives. Not because luck smiled at the perfect moment, but because preparation created space for opportunity to take root and grow. Most people collapse that gap. They make what they hope for and what they prepare for the same thing, betting everything on a single outcome, structuring their entire financial life around the assumption that things will go according to plan. And when reality inevitably diverges from expectation, when markets shift, when opportunities take longer, when circumstances change, they have nowhere to go. They're trapped. They're fragile. They're at the mercy of forces they can't control. But the people who build wealth that lasts, who create lives of genuine freedom and security, they live in that gap. They hold both realities at once. They hope for extraordinary outcomes while preparing for ordinary ones. They dream of the best while protecting against the worst. They understand that the world rewards those who can stay, not those who burn brightest. Burning bright is easy. Anyone can do it for a moment. But staying, remaining in the game through volatility, through disappointment, through the long stretches where nothing seems to be working, that requires something deeper than enthusiasm. It requires the quiet discipline of building for multiple possible futures. This is the truth that changes everything. The realization that shifts you from fragile to anti-fragile, from dependent to independent, from waiting to building. You don't need to know what's coming. You only need to be ready for whatever does. You don't need to predict the market, anticipate every shift, or have perfect foresight about which opportunities will pay off. You only need to structure your life in a way that can handle multiple different outcomes, that can bend without breaking, that can absorb shocks and continue forward. Hope tells you that everything will work out. It whispers that if you just believe enough, stay positive enough, maintain the right energy, the universe will deliver what you want. Reality whispers something different. Reality whispers that you'll work it out, whatever comes, that you'll adapt, adjust, pivot, and find a way forward, regardless of whether things unfold as hoped. One makes you passive. One makes you active. One makes you wait for magic. The other makes you the magician. Napoleon Hill wrote in Think and Grow Rich, strength and growth come only through continuous effort and struggle. But the struggle isn't against fate or fortune. It's the struggle to see clearly, to prepare honestly, to build realistically, even when hope is urging you to skip those steps and just believe. And in the end, after years of building, preparing, adjusting, and persisting, the wealth you accumulate isn't just measured in money. It's not counted solely in account balances or property values or investment returns. It's measured in something deeper, something that money represents but cannot fully capture. It's measured in the peace of knowing you can handle what life brings, the peace that comes from having built margins, having created options, having prepared for uncertainty instead of pretending it doesn't exist. It's measured in the freedom of not needing perfection, the freedom to make mistakes without being destroyed by them, to be wrong without losing everything, to face disappointment without falling apart. It's the freedom to take risks because you've protected yourself from catastrophe. It's the freedom to say no to opportunities that don't meet your criteria because you're not desperate for any opportunity to work out. And it's measured in the power of still being here, when others have fallen away. The power that comes not from being smarter or luckier or more talented, but from being more prepared, more resilient, more committed to staying in the game. While others gave up after the first failure, you persisted. While others panicked during downturns, you held steady. While others bet everything on single outcomes, you diversified. While others needed magic, you built systems. This is what it means to think like a millionaire. Not to hope harder, but to see clearer. Not to believe more, but to prepare better. Not to wait for the perfect moment, but to build something that works across imperfect moments. And in doing so, in making this shift from hope-based optimism to reality-based confidence, you don't lose your dreams. You gain the power to actually achieve them. Because hope feels good. It does. But reality builds wealth. And the wisdom to know the difference between the two, that's what changes everything. Thank you for walking this path of awareness with me, for questioning what you've been taught about hope and success, for being willing to see differently, to consider that the conventional wisdom around optimism and belief might be incomplete, might even be holding you back from the very things you're trying to build. It takes courage to examine beliefs that have shaped how you move through the world, especially when those beliefs feel like they're core to who you are. The shift from wishful thinking to grounded preparation doesn't happen all at once. It's not a single decision or a dramatic revelation. It unfolds quietly, in small choices, in ordinary moments when you choose reality over reassurance. It happens when you run the numbers, even though you don't want to see them. When you build the backup plan, even though it feels like hedging. When you protect the downside, even though focusing on the upside feels better. These small choices compound over time into something profound, a life built on foundations that can actually hold you. May you build a life that doesn't need everything to go right. And in doing so, may you discover that more things go right than you ever imagined, not because the universe suddenly favors you, but because you're still there to benefit when opportunity arrives, because you didn't burn out waiting for perfect conditions, because you built something sustainable instead of something spectacular. Hope feels good. Reality builds wealth. And wisdom, true wisdom, knows how to hold both. To dream with your eyes open, to reach for more while preparing for less, to move forward with confidence that comes not from knowing what will happen, but from knowing you'll be okay regardless. Thank you for listening. Now go build something real.